So that's kind of what the Book of Thoth is, in a sense. It's his way of explaining initiation. So what we want to look at first is how is this deck different than other decks? What did Crowley change? What are the significant parts? The first thing, the thing that he makes the really big deal out of is the line from the Liber Al, the letters of my old book are right, but Zadi is not the star. So he had to find a new attribution for Zadi. And this took a long time, which he kind of kicks himself for later because it seems to be obvious. He talks about in the Book of Thoth how there was sort of, originally you see the zodiac as a circle, and the Golden Dawn essentially reversed the Justice card and the Strength card, which created a loop. And he saw if he adjusted the Emperor and the Star, he could create another equilibrating loop on the other side, so you essentially have a spiral instead of a circle, which to Crowley at the time was a revelation that Aiwass knew what he was talking about and was trying to make sense to him. Because it took him years to figure it out, it became more significant to him. Interestingly, there is a current of thought that claims that the figure in the original text is not a Zadi, but something else, which would kind of fly in the face of a lot of what Crowley says. He was clearly committed to this. Personally, I tend to take Crowley at his word for those kind of things. Maybe not his personal stories, maybe not what he did in his life, and maybe not what people said about it, or what he says people said about him. But at least when he's talking about the occult, I tend to trust him. So that's just my take on it. But I would encourage people to explore that idea and come up with their own conclusions about it. Crowley writes a lot about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you want further details, definitely just look in the Book of Thoth, because he goes into great detail about it. There are a few other things he changed, similar minor changes. For example, he renamed the Justice card Adjustment, which is a sense of him trying to take sort of conventional morality out of the system. What he says is, justice is a subjective thing, a subjective concept. What one person will consider justice, another person might consider a crime. Whereas adjustment just refers to the universe sort of balancing. A push here happens, so a pull has to happen somewhere else. So that's more of an objective assessment, and what he considered to be more closely in line with sort of the forces of nature and the way that they work. He changed the Strength card to the Joy card, and instead of sort of a meek, pleasant woman with the lion, which you see in like the Rider-Waite deck, what he has is the Babylon and the Beast. And Crowley, it says basically that he wanted it to be lust, because lust implies a combination of strength and joy. And he wanted to bring that element of joy to it, an element of force and fire to it, and pull it away from sort of the idea, the meek will inherit the earth idea of overcoming through gentleness, which is definitely not part of Thelema in any way, shape, or form. Glorious strength, you would say, is what is sort of being represented there. And Crowley's other contribution to the interpretation of that card is that he connects it deeply with ceremonial magic, not just because it's been reestablished in the 11th position, which to him is the number of magic, but for him, when this card comes up, this means that it's time to really call on occult forces to accomplish the thing that you're looking for, and you really don't see that interpretation in earlier versions of the deck. Because of the changes that he made, the most significant changes to me are the changes that he made to the Lovers card and the Art card. The Lovers in Liber 14 is a great detail has gone into the explanation of this, where the angels say, you shouldn't call this the Lovers, you should call it the Brothers, and it makes a direct reference to Cain and Abel. And this flip around is interesting. Because it changes the whole idea of that card in that position. Although Crowley still calls it the Lovers, and in the Harris version of the card, it depicts a holy marriage. But you do still see Cain with the hammer of Thor after having killed Abel. He's still there in the card. The reference is there, but he didn't officially change the title. I'm really not sure why he did that. I think it would be more appropriate to leave it like that, but for whatever reason, he made that choice. But this is where things get really intense in Liber 14, and it says, okay, here's how we interpret the Cain and Abel myth. We understand that Abel is a child of Adam and Eve, but Cain is the child of Eve and the serpent, and he is the initiation force, where the adepts are considered to be the children of Cain, and marked in the same way. It says quite bluntly in Liber 14, the mark of Cain is the same as the mark of the beast. If we look what those two marks mean, after God sees that Cain has killed Abel, he puts a mark on him to curse him, because Cain was originally a farmer, and this was kind of the big significant thing where Abel worked with animals and he sacrificed an animal to God. Cain worked with plants, with vegetables, and he made a vegetable sacrifice to God, and God was not pleased with that sacrifice. He wanted real blood. So that's what pissed Cain off, and then he kills Abel, and that becomes the sacrifice which puts the mark on him. And it says in Liber 14, God didn't, what is it exactly? God didn't hear the children of Eve until blood was shed. So this curse that God puts on Cain is kind of interesting. If you take it back to Adam and Eve, Adam gets cursed because he eats the apple to be cast out of the garden and to work the earth, which is what Cain was doing. And when God puts his curse on Cain, the earth will no longer give up anything to him. In a sense, it's a relief from the curse, the original curse, that God puts on Adam and Eve. And it also means that he can't be killed. The whole point of putting the mark on him, because Cain says, if you put me out there, I'm going to die, someone's going to kill me. And God's like, no, I won't let them, basically. Which is weird, because he calls it a curse, but it's almost like protection. And that's when he, and it's also significant to the system that Enoch was the first child of Cain and his wife. And it goes into a little bit of the generations of Cain, which is where you get the first idea in the Bible that, okay, Adam and Eve and their kids aren't the only people in the world. Even though they've been cast out into the world, there's obviously other people, because Cain's cast out and he goes and reproduces with them. But the fact that it's equated with the mark of the beast is interesting, because in the book of Revelations, what it says about the mark of the beast is, no man can buy or sell without this mark on them. So what's the connection? You have this mark, that means that we're told in Liber 14, this is the symbol of initiation. This is what, when you are initiated into the brotherhood, when you go into the AA, this is the mark that it puts on you, essentially. So to equate the ability to buy or sell with the protection of God from wicked men, and the inability to work the earth in that sense, in the sense of the original curse of Adam, I don't know. I have my own opinions about it. I don't really think that it would be appropriate for me to go into those at this point in time, but I think that this is a really important thing for people to think about. I'm not going to tell anyone what they should think about it, but they should be thinking about it like this. This is a big deal. The kinship with the serpent is sort of the thing that initiates sort of have to grapple with and get with, and find some understanding of this idea and how it might play out in your own initiatory experience. I really don't like telling people what to think about stuff, but yeah, this should be on your plate or something to think about. It's interesting that the spilling of blood becomes this sort of catalyst for the initiatory system, because when Crowley goes on later, actually I think it's earlier in the 14, and he talks about the Black Brothers, that's a sort of opposing ritual. He compares it to the Passover, in a sense of there is a blood sacrifice, and for the Black Brothers this is something they do to keep out the angel of death, to avoid the destruction of the ego, and in so doing they fail to cross the abyss and sort of wither away in their own temples and turn into nothing, because their magical power is not significant to sustain the force of their initiation. So you sort of get to a certain point in the system, you either cross the abyss or you wither away. But there's a spilling of blood that happens there as well. They say it takes that blood to create a bar for the angel of death, to keep them out of the pylon and preserve their ego. So again, compare those two rituals. The Passover, and the whole idea of the sacrifice of Christ, we're sort of taught as the good version, whereas Cain is the evil version. But Cain's version is the one that carries you all the way to the end, and this other ritual is the one that seals you up and prevents your power from growing and expanding into the supernal realm. Again, have my own opinions, not going to tell anyone what to think, but this is coming to some idea of the conflict between these two ideas, or what that might mean, is going to be important, and it's something that people should think about. And it's depicted in a number of ways in the tarot deck that Crowley came up with. He changed the sort of coloring of the lovers/brothers card is the art card, where he totally changes, and he actually doesn't mention why he changes it from temperance to art, although it's not really too hard to figure out that temperance is not exactly on Crowley's agenda. He's not a temperate person, and he's not encouraging temperance for anybody. But how does that connect to art? Well, the idea that I've mentioned in a couple of things before. So one of the what to me is one of the fundamental premises of ceremonial magic, particularly as it comes to relate into sex magic, is that if we are created in the image of God, the thing that we know the most about God is God created the universe. So we are closest to that when we ourselves are creating. And art is a form of creation. Crowley says very clearly in his commentaries on Liber Al that we shouldn't mistake what he calls the gross consequence or something like that of sex, i.e. the creation of children. He's like, we shouldn't see that as the main purpose. It's creative energy, it's creative force, but he's like, we can use this in all kinds of different ways. It shouldn't be just devoted to creating children, because that's sort of the least of its capacity. So the art card is where Crowley sort of calls back on the imagery that he pulls out in the lover's card, and you see that sort of that chemical wedding that happens in that card sort of re-imaged in the art card, because it occupies the opposite sort of spot on the zodiac. And art is not moderate. It's not temperate. It's a creative force. And Crowley connects that card in the appendices to the vision of the arrow that he receives in Liber 14, which is an interesting thing to look at, because it's a very clear idea that the angels are trying to provide him with direction. And the whole concept of direction, the idea this is where things are going, is key not just to true will and Thelema, because true will is an active process. You're doing something. There is a next step. And literally, like, this is what he describes the AA as, we're trying to find the next step for humanity, the next step for these ideas, and the next step for individuals in their initiation. And the thing is, you can't possibly know where the next step is if you don't know where you're going. You have to have some concept of that, or any step is just as good as another if you have no concrete direction. So this is his sort of attempt to get into that direction and look at where everything is going, which brings us right back to the Enochian angels. For them, the end point is the apocalypse, this great revelation. In a personal initiatory sense, anyone who's been initiated kind of knows the first thing that happens generally is one gets plunged into a personal level of chaos. Certain things get uprooted. There's always unrest of some kind. Your life tends to change pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. And it's usually not pleasant at first. But the sort of larger sense of that, as alchemists, we all sort of say, oh, as above, so below. So in the larger sense, or as the angels say, as below, so above. So they're hoping that by creating these sort of personal initiatory experiences, they will touch off a larger sort of global chaos, a global initiation, and actually change the current of the world, which is sort of what Crowley was doing when we have the change to the new Aeon with the Book of the Law, where he says, okay, there's a new sheriff in town, there's a new law, a new way that we're doing things, the spiritual current has changed, and it's very clear it will take time for that to manifest itself on a larger scale, but understanding this sort of algebra of initiation is how we get to that point and further sort of spread that current. Crowley makes another reference to the Cain and Abel thing in his commentaries, where he sort of describes it as the idea that this sort of silent, unconscious self who identifies with Cain has to kill the outward conscious self so that it can raise again incorruptible. In a sense, and this is sort of a metaphor for the coming to being of true will, where you probably not, most people, even if you have been practicing with the occult for a long time, even if you've been involved with Thelema for a long time, it's not necessarily that easy to, unconscious is unconscious for a reason. No one ever really gets to know they're unconscious, because if they knew they're unconscious, it would be conscious. So we all have drives, however self-aware we might think we are, we all have drives that we're not aware of, that we have to become aware of. And as we become aware of them, they sort of destroy our previous outward self, and then we have to reinvent that previous outward self in light of this new information. And this isn't something that happens once. You don't have like a great experience where suddenly you realize, and then, oh, okay, I'm reinventing myself, I'm done. No, it never ends. It's a constant process of that happening and that going on. And the further people want to explore the Cain and Abel story, I think the deeper you can go with that. There's a lot of good room for thought and meditation on that story and these ideas.